that created the English nation. I mean, that's a whole historical point, but so Heimgest being seen in many ways as the father of the English nation, it was a very suitable name and figurehead for the hearth and for a first hearth. Hearth development, of course, has been another one of the growths, the evolutions. The rituals themselves have evolved. The blots have evolved, and of course this will continue to do so. But for instance, the introduction of Guldra into the blots was a definite development, because there's only if it had been put in immediately, not enough people would have been even aware of what it was to actually put the real emphasis or gain from it. But because Guldra became more and more practiced at hearth level, then at the whole movement level, it was decided, yes, this will now be, this is incorporated in. That's just an example of how the blots will develop. Now we're at the stage, for instance, where we have, and this is again on a material development, we have the national branches, which, as I stressed earlier, are basically administrative sections. That doesn't mean there's levels of autonomy, but it just shows that development. There's the prison outreach wing now, which after our withdrawal of support from the MPKA, we felt it positive if we could do it. We might as well do it ourselves rather than trying to support someone else doing it. That's a new development, and it's one which is already quite considerably more advanced than we may have even considered it would be. It's a very positive development there. Our work with our incarcerated comrades is developing well, and issues of religious freedom and religious rights. Again, we seek to help this within the prison system, but if they're obtained in there, it's not just confined to prison. Once they're accepted within a prison context, it actually helps the attainment of such rights and recognition within society at large.
Why does the Odinic Rite help prisoners?
The Odinic Rite helps prisoners because they are members of our folk, and we do not. If a man has lost his liberty, and it was deserved, fine. His liberty, his physical liberty, has been removed. That is a consequence of his action. However, we don't believe that should then deny his spiritual birthright, and we also believe that by following Odinism, it actually leads to a more noble, beneficial, positive way of life. So by helping a woman who is incarcerated, if they can then discover a lifestyle and a life way and an identity which actually gives them self-esteem, gives them definition, gives them identity, gives them a code, a noble code to live by, when they've left prison, they are going to be automatically more beneficial to our community. Now, if we don't help people, we can't really. We would have to say we're denying our folk, some of our folk, a natural right to practice their own organic religion and faith. So we do help, and because also. And this may seem a strange, it's not a reason we help them, but it's an interesting byproduct. Obviously, one thing someone serving a prison sentence has got more of than average people is time for study. So a lot of the time, it is within prison that these men or women and women have actually got time to put it to practice, to learn, to study, and to begin to put into practice an Odinist way of life before they've actually left prison.
The Odinic Rite seems big on social activism. Is there other types of social activism that the Odinic Rite's engaged in?
Yeah, we do believe social activism is an expression of the Odinist impulse, and it's expressed outwards within society. There are, for instance, we've been involved in environmental concerns. One which has been recent, it's possibly not that well known outside Britain itself, but there was a monument called the White Horse Stone. Very important to Odinists, and it actually marks the spot where Horsa, mentioned Heimgest earlier, Heimgest and Horsa were the twin chieftains. This is where his slain body was lain. So it's become a very sacred site for Odinists. This was threatened on two occasions with basically destruction and despoilation by financial, materialistic concerns. So the Odinic Rite were at the forefront of the campaigns to save this area. We have been involved in other similar campaigns of an environmental nature. Also, there is now, in the area of education, one of our hearths has set up a homeschooling, and we would count that as social action. I mean, this is helping to educate, truly educate our young and the children of any movement, any folk, any society. The children are the treasures for the future. A society which is going to deny the importance of its children is heading for doom.
How does the Odinic Rite differ in its ritual formulation as compared to other denominations of Odinism?
Well, I'm not familiar with every denomination's practice, of course, but ours is probably much like the Odinic Rite itself. There's probably a more defined structure. Having said that, a lot of other Odinists as a true groups have actually been very influenced by the OR thought outlook and including blot structure. But there are some groups who have a very short blot structure, and the main part would actually be the mead passing and the toasting. The actual invocation would be very short, sometimes ad lib almost. But we actually have a structure which adheres. Also, we hope we have our whole blot wheel which adheres to the rhythm of life, and I think our structure is probably more highly formalised than most. This doesn't mean it's rigid, and it doesn't mean the words we have in our blot will have to be repeated every time, but it provides a frame to build on. And we look at it, it's not there to provide chains which hold one down. It actually gives one wings to express and soar.
When was the Book of Blotter first formulated?
The first written OR blotters came actually from the 70s, but they were then single sheets, and they were actually different in form. I haven't got one with me. Quite a bit was there's quite a bit that's been added, and that the sources for that were numerous. There were obviously some of the old texts, Anglo-Saxon, various Anglo-Saxon literature, a whole range of literature elements were used. There were the practices which were first set down by Rudd Mills with his Anglican Church of Woden. That helped influence, but also historical writings, Tacitus writings. If there were all these things, sort of formed like threads for a whole tapestry. And then it's probably true to say not a great deal changed from the time of its inception until around the late 80s. Then probably reflecting the deepening and the sort of growth of the rite itself. Certain things were added, certain things were changed. Guldra being one which was added. And then it was felt we should have a volume, at least for people to follow, that would give the structure and would give the sort of heart, the heart 12 blots, if you like. And that was produced, was written down, and actually there was a great deal of rewriting. They were all looked at, all the blots as they had been written on these single sheets were written out were reviewed, and that's when a lot of changes took place. A lot was removed, some was added, and so then it was produced in I think it came out in probably 91, 92. It was a long time in the writing, it has to be said, and then it's produced. So.
When do you feel you first became an Odinist?
That's a very hard question, because I would say not just myself, but I mean everybody of our folk is kind of born in a way an Odinist, but I am consciously aware is I think what we have to focus on, and that would be when I was around 12. I actually didn't call it Odinism, but I was aware that our people had their own organic way, their own religion, their own spiritual path. And at that time, I actually called it, I had to think of some term, you couldn't just, and that's called thealism. And the awakening to that had come from a kind of realization of Heimdall. So I'd gone from being interested in our, in various aspects of our culture and past to actually considering, well, actually we have a living spiritual path which is ours, because it's formed in this association. It's the sum of our folks' experience in a symbiotic relationship with the forces of creation, of nature. And obviously 12, you're a kid, it's going to be a very childish, naive approach to it, but that's when I first considered that I had I followed a religion which later on was I called Odinism as well, when I found other Odinists. So yeah, that would be the age, but I mean obviously I was a kid.
What are some of your earlier influences as far as writings go?
What books which kind of influenced me? One of the most influential was Dawn of the Magicians, strangely enough, by those two French authors whose names I can't recall. But also, I mean, mythological works, just the myths as they were, myths and legends of the North, by various authors. That I was always fascinated by these, and then I suppose it was those which kicked a whole awareness and sparked an interest in. If I was to pick a kind of author in particular, I would say I'm going to probably mix his name up. Branson with Gods of the North. That was one of the books which really stands out as I read as a child, or really had influence on me, and I still actually like this book today. It's in other ways I can't really. There's no. I mean, if someone was talking and said, "Have you read this book?" it might spring to mind, but there's no other real major books which I thought, "Wow, this is."
In the maturing process, do you think some works like Kipling or Nietzsche or Jungian, did that affect your later development?
In my later development, I would say, yeah, it's interestingly mentioning all these. Kipling, of course, became very very interesting because he expressed a great deal of, both in his prose and his verse, kind of essential feelings. Nietzschean philosophy I found very interesting, and of course Jungian, the archetype ideal, and Jungian psychology is another thing which I see how it's all connected and it makes sense. And yeah, it obviously has helped impact and help my understanding and my own growth. And also, what I would say, as I became older, matured, some of the best reading matter I think is actually from the Vedic texts, the very early, or as early as we can record, Aryan writings, because there is the essence, one of the earliest sources of the essence of our beliefs, without the centuries of suppression or taint at them. And if we can read them in a way, I mean, these things of course have their own overlays on top, but if we get at the essence of these, we can learn a great deal from it. So that was, they have been other, Rig Veda, Laws of Manu, these have been other books which have been kind of influential to me.
When did you first join the Odinic Rite?
I first joined the Odinic Rite, as far as I'm aware, it would have been the early 80s. I can't say the precise year. It was at the time, I think it was probably 82. But what had happened anyway, we'd learned in the 70s of the existence of the Odinic Rite, but this was when we still had the Heimdall League. And to be honest, with a certain amount of arrogance and exclusiveness of youth, and we don't need to join anybody else. But then, as we matured, grew older, and then the concerns of young adulthood begin, the Heimdall League really had outworn its useful existence, but rather than, as I think I said earlier, rather than just, well, let's reinvent the wheel, we should check out and look at these other already existing groups and see if we can help them. If we join them, that will, we'll put our energies to something that's already there. And of these, the only one which to us appeared, or to me, viable was the Odinic Rite. So that would have been probably 82, 83.
Was the writer profession still a part of the Odinic Rite at the time, with its evolution?
Yeah, the profession, the wording has actually changed. I mean, but the idea of you join as an apprentice, as it were, and then at a certain time, if you feel you want to make a very deeply personal commitment, then you become professed, and that was always there. That was set up from the start. That idea.
Did you quickly become professed?
No, I didn't. I remained professor for probably 92, about 4 years. It took, not because I was not committed, but I first of all I wanted to fully immerse myself in the way the Odinic Rite looks at things, and it's just something that I wanted to, because it is so important and it is so deeply personal. I wanted to wait. I decided earlier that I would become professed, but I needed to wait until I felt this is the right time. And how you choose that, I think, is probably individual. I mean, it just felt right. That's all I can. I wanted to be professed. This is the right time. And because of its seriousness of nature, I deliberately did wait. I mean, you cannot be professed anyway for at least 1 year of membership. So after I'd passed that time, I thought, yes, I would want to be professed, but I shall wait.
Who are some of the early influences in the Odinic Rite that you feel impacted your system of beliefs, your personal being?
With the Odinic Rite, I mean, would have to say even though he wasn't he was a figure who wasn't there very physically very much at all, Hosgold, simply because he'd had such a lot to do in the shaping of. There's another man who I found to be very influential, and he's called a Gothi member today, is Asbjorn. Asbjorn's influence, his being older, he'd had, his more experience, and his knowledge of the esoteric aspects I found to be very much very helpful and an influence. As far as other direct influences, it's very hard to say, because none stand out as offering a very direct influence. But obviously, everyone you, in some way or another, everyone you meet, in some way, large, small, obviously or subtly, influences you. So I would have to, I would just have to say those two, and I can't think of.
When did you first become a member of the Court of the Gothar?
I was first asked to join in 1986, I believe, 87, and I was treasurer. And this is really not my strong point, but I did it to the best of my ability. And then at that time, John Jarl Stubber was the director, and then he retired from that position in 1989, and the court met, and I was elected as director in 1989.
What do you think your role is as the director of the Odinic Rite, as the head of the Court of the Gothar?
Yeah, it's kind of multi-layered, I suppose, because on this one level, I'm kind of like an official figurehead, you could say. I'm the I would be a spokesman. I mean, there'd be other spokesmen, but the Court of Gothar is the guiding body. The director really is sort of the ultimate decision maker, I suppose. But that doesn't imply that it's made individually. I mean, it's in coordination with a lot of factors. The Rite as a whole, actually, although it is governed by the CG, it's not sort of divorced from everybody else at all. It's very much involved. It is this circle. In some ways, some people on for instance, on ritual level, I would be seen. Some would use a title of All-Shur Jarl Gothi, which we don't use, and I've no desire to use it. So I would be seen as the figurehead and the head priest, in a way, to use these terms. So on a ritual side, there was that. It's basically to head in the court and the Rite as a whole. It provides it. You have to have, or we believe, you need a definable leader, by whatever term is known, or figurehead, steersman, helmsman. Terminology, again, director isn't that important. But there has to be a figure who will take a certain amount of lead and will take a leadership role. And
this is my final question. There's quite a bit of historical data around about the role of the Gothar and the individual Gothi. What do you think the role of the Gothi or the Gothar is in modern times?
Well, this would be probably the subject of a whole session in itself, because but as quickly as possible. And actually, I'll just add that this is another one of the actions the OR has. We have now developed more training material. There's more training courses. These have been developed, and we've now we've now launching our own, be a serious Gothi Githya training course scheme, whatever. But the role is, first of all, they will provide they're kind of like a spiritual leadership to their hearth. A Gothi would have his hearth. and community in general. So he should be able to advise not just on religious subjects, not just on spiritual subjects. He's got to be, or she, if she's a Gothi, has to be a kind of an advisor, a kind of leader as well, someone who can give good counsel, or hopefully good counsel. They were also, to a degree, on a more mundane level, we would see them as actually organising our movement. They would be more easily identified as the officers of the OR, for instance, and they would then be. It would be part of their responsibility to see that the policies and protocol of the Odinic Rite are being carried out within the area, the locality that they are actually active. So, without taking anything away from some of the more purely spiritual aspects, and that would be a very important one. It's also, we believe, they have to be leaders on a material level as well, and not officers of the Rite, we would put it.
Do you have anything to say in final summation?
Yeah, the final summation I would make is Odinism and the Odinic Rite and our folk in general perhaps can be characterised by innovation and creativity. The fact that we're having this interview, the fact that I've come to this